Hello, everyone. I'm Tiny Cross-H.U.G. Welcome to the Trumped Up Live Show. I came across a video a couple moments ago which states how elite destroyed the Democratic Party in the U.S. and fuels populism. Now, you got to think about what is populism, right? Um, it's a Populism is a position not as a comprehensive ideology, but one that attaches itself to a broader political movement like socialism. Now we get it crossed up a little bit because when we think about socialism, when we think about liberalism, liberalism is always attached to the Democratic Party, but in the conservatives are always attached themselves to the conservative party, right? Some of the major differences between the conservative party, it has individual freedoms. This is what they stand on. It limits government. Um, it's all about the rule of law, and it's all about peace through strength, and it's all about fiscal fiscal responsibility. Now, when you get towards liberalism, you think of that you would have these same that you would think that you would have these type of freedom out of the Liberal Party, which is the Democratic Party. But when you think about the history of the Democratic Party, you don't necessarily have freedoms. You got government trying to consume control of everything. You got a place like California, for instance, that is so regulated that not only people are moving, but businesses are moving. And with Trump having the opportunity to have so much investment and so much investment being given into the United States right now, I think there's only one company that is actually coming to California, and that is Apple, because somewhere out there in Central California is the minerals necessary for it to uh, keep up with the build of its iPhone capacity, right? So let's go into this video real quick. Let's see what this guy has to say with regards to how the Democrat Party in the U.S. is destroying. Excuse me. How elites destroy the Democratic Party in the U.S. and fuel populism.
Hi, I'm Steve Clemens, and I have a question. How shipwrecked and hopeless is America's Democratic Party? Let's get to the bottom line. After its resounding defeat in the last election, the Democratic Party has been desperately searching for a way forward. We're talking focus groups, consultants, soul searching, you name it. The party ran on a tone-deaf platform celebrating the status quo last year, not recognizing the American people wanted radical change and not more of the same. But months later, the Democrats still don't look like they have a plan for the future, with polls indicating they're at a 30-year low in popularity. And if Democratic supporters thought their party would stand up as the main opposition to Trump, they've been disappointed thus far. So how did the party that used to represent working-class Americans and the civil rights agenda sink so low and lose touch so fast? And how can it unite if it's still undecided whether to shift more to the right or to the left on issues such as immigration?
You know, with regards to the civil rights movement, I disagree that the Democratic Party literally aligned to civil rights because black people fought for equal protection. What the Democratic Party wanted us to do was integrate, and they felt that the only way that they were going to have control over us as a people was to integrate us into this country. When all we wanted to simply fight for was equal rights, and you can let us off and go about doing things on our own.
Or social justice and Palestine. Today we're talking with Joan Williams, distinguished professor and founder of the Equality Action Center at the University of California College of Law. And she's author of Outclassed: How the Left Lost the Working Class and How to Win Them Back. Joan, thank you so much for joining us. I have your book here. Let me just ask you an obvious question right up front. Is it as easy as a light switch to turn on and off after the Democratic Party has essentially lost the working class, as you argue, for them to get them back?
It's not as easy as a light switch, but it's not as hard as it's making them, Steve. There's a very clear path forward. First of all, is to understand why people are so angry. If wages had continued to rise when productivity did, like they did in the years after World War II, wages would be 43% higher than they are today. And for that and a host of other reasons, basically every American used to do better than their parents. But of those born in 1980, only about half will. People are just beside themselves. There's been a really radical inequality of income growth, and it's between individuals, but also between regions. So many regions of the country feel left behind. And what this has done is it's fueled economic populism. And there's really two different kinds of populism. One is left populism. They're robbing you blind. The other is right populism. They're looking down on you. And what the Democrats need to do very simply is lean in to left populism and stop reinforcing right populism by stopping calling people who certainly things like deplorables, but also the focus on defense of democracy. Although we need to defend democracy, we need to understand that what you need to do to defend democracy in the short term is really different from what you need to do to defend it in the long term. In the short term, you need to do everything we're doing, resistance in the streets, in the courts. But in the longer term, what Democrats need to do is to reconnect with this economic anger of these fragile and failing middle-class people and connect that with the growing anger of younger, even college-educated voters who can't afford a house, can't afford childcare, often can only get short-term or gig work. There's a lot of economic anger out there, and
Right.
That's the first step. And then the second step is to turn the wedge cultural issues into bridge issues. And there's a very simple formula for that, Steve.
I don't necessarily know that it's a simple formula for that, right? The reason why I say that there is not a simple formula for that is because regulations, for instance, she's from California, and the regulations have downplayed the growth of so much in this country. Where not only in this country, but I would just leave it in California at the moment. The growth of so much in California, just because the Democratic Party wants to assume control of everything. They'll find, like she said, they will rob you blind. They will tax you for everything. There's so much taxes being, brought to the people and businesses of California, that both businesses and people are leaving. The population is consistently declining in California, and the only way that it is staying pace is with the immigrant population. But that's a whole nother story. Let me continue.
Wasn't the writing already on the wall that if they kept this up, the Democratic Party was in fact going to lose workers?
Well, neoliberalism was a wild and sexy dream. It was the dream that capitalism would transform China into a democracy much like us, that every nation would produce what could produce most efficiently, and it would rise all boats. And you know what? It didn't rise all boats. What it turned into is pitting the fortunes of middle status workers in industrialized democracies against the poorest workers on the planet. and seeing whom capitalists wanted to hire. That wasn't going to end well, and it didn't end well. Neither did creating an economy where hugely disproportionate amount of the country's wealth went to a relatively limited number of superstar cities, leaving huge areas of the country left behind.
Yeah, that's the reason why this is primarily the reason why you guys California attempted to separate right now into two different states, right? And another thing that I want to bring up is how the Democratic Party, after the Civil Rights Act of 1964, 64, 65, I believe it was 64. Right after that, they implemented the Immigration Act of 1965. The Immigration Act of 1965, it was meant to change the demographics of America. And in those cities, uh, in those cities where you were supposed to have a preference and individuals were supposed to be here through sponsorship and for reunification, right? And these people were supposed to have skilled labor. However, you had a bunch of low skilled labor individuals come over here to this country based on the Immigration Act of 1965, completely getting people out of the putting people into a lower class while consistently allowing them to come into middle class when those people was already supposed to have skills that they were supposed to bring to this country. Instead, you brought over low skilled labor and which assumed a lot of the skills, which was able to build us up to assume a lot of skills in this country, right? While at the same time, what you begin to see is we start to lose middle class jobs, and it's based on a, democratic agenda of wanting to, be social. Like she was going into China, how she said allow capitalism to win when it comes to uh, pinning allow capitalism to win to see we know who works out best, right? And you now that's why you have such of a problem with the immigration population right now because capitalism isn't winning when it comes to bridging that gap in humanity. Like you literally got to take care of your people and not allow capitalism to work itself out within itself. China is did a good job of trying to build up its nation with the jobs of the American people. And American then at that time we did nothing but lose.
So I think that one of the things that Democrats need to focus on is they have often been very focused on the poor and helping the poor through redistributive programs, which as a Democrat I think are really important, but those redistributive programs are very different from what the traditional people in the middle want. They don't want government redistribution. They want a job that pays the bills. They want a job that gives them dignity. And this is, the Mamdani campaign in New York has been so misinterpreted from both the right and the left. But basically, what Mamdani said is that
Listen, if you don't give a person a job in this country, they don't have a title. If you allow um, other individuals to come to this country and take title of the jobs that the people in the middle class, absolutely want, then you completely deny the middle class a position in this country to feel like they are an important part of it. And this is what she's going into, right? Continue listening to what she's saying about Mendani.
and this is almost literally a quote from his victory speech. He said, "Hard work should yield a stable life," and I think that's what the relatives that you're talking to want. That's what younger college grads want when they can't afford a house and they can't get a steady job. That's what these middle status voters want, who have veered towards the far right, not only in the United States, but also throughout Europe.
When you speak about Mamdani and the remarkable success he has had thus far, and he's not elected yet, but he's way ahead of the packet. You know, he may come in. There are lots of folks organizing against his potential success in becoming the mayor of New York. I mean, I don't think you can run both in New York and West Virginia, but how do you bring a party together that's going to need to somehow appeal to people across those geographic and economic lines?
I think you can run, Steve, both in New York and West Virginia on the same message. Hard work should yield a stable life. And that's what we as Democrats are going to deliver. Now, that.
Listen, don't believe that. Democrats are not trying to deliver you the ability to go through hard work. I mean, to have the ability to have access to this country through hard work. Now, they are allowing other individuals to do so, who we call migrants and immigrant, or the migrant population. I don't want to say immigrant population, but they, are categorized as immigrants, whether it's through illegal means or legal means, whether it's through H1 or H2 visas. That we Trump has put a limit on these things for a reason. And that is because it was supposed to be, these individuals supposed to be high skilled labor positions, and it was supposed to be preference off the what they could provide for the country in terms of a workforce. Say, for instance, how is the individual in high school supposed to get a job if all the low class jobs are going to illegal immigrants? It was, there is a needed workforce, but then there's a problem of somewhat outsourcing your international work or your national work, and or outsourcing your national work, a workforce, to people that's coming in from the outside. So there's nothing wrong with being a barista. You know what I'm saying? There's nothing wrong with low end jobs, because them low end jobs will potentially go into high end jobs. Just like what we're seeing for individuals come to this country looking for opportunities, they go from a low end job to a high end job. But if you're taking all the low end jobs, how is people supposed to get to the high end jobs?
Is not a centrist message. And in fact, it's a left populist message. So the formula for these middle status voters is that they're very progressive economically, but they're quite conservative culturally. And that is a formula that the challenge for Democrats, the idea of being quite left economically and making sure that anyone who works hard can achieve a stable standard of living, that should not be divisive at all among Democrats. The challenge for.
And that's exactly where they're losing. Stop trying to give out handouts every time in order for you to assume control of the people. The, Listen, we don't want handouts. We want to work hard just as any other individual. We don't need your social programs. Yeah, we may need them for a time being, but at the same time, give us the opportunity to work hard for what we want, because there's going to be much more satisfaction in that. But you're not going to be able to socialize us in a way that allows other people to come in and primarily take the jobs or outsourcing our jobs to other country and think that we're going to be satisfied with that, and that's going to make us happy. What's going to make us happy is, first of all, being able to have a living wage, being able to compete amongst ourselves. And if are able to compete amongst ourselves, then that allows our businesses to compete. Now, we are not trying to be like, for instance, China, right? Where people are working from 9 to 9. No, we're not trying to be that abusive, but it seems as if, to absolutely have an opportunity in this country nowadays, you have to have almost like a 99. Like, so for instance, I know a lot of people who's working two, three jobs, some hopefully in hopes to find a good job, right? But when you don't even act, I mean, when you don't even allow that type of mobility because things are going and increasing because of regulation, here you're self imploding within yourself.
Democrats is how to proceed on some of these cultural issues, but there's a formula for how to proceed on cultural issues, how to again turn these wedge issues into bridge issues. If you understand the basic values that motivate this middle class, these middle class folks, blue collar values reflect blue collar lives. And Democrats have to learn again how to connect with blue collar values and how to communicate the logic of those lives to the
Democrats are not going to align with blue collar values. Democrats are going to align with cheap labor, getting labor as cheaply as possible, controlling people. We're going to help you out until you're able to get that cheap labor. Even when you get even when we're using you as cheap labor, we still want to have some type of hold on you. So we want to be able to give you something. And if you act up, we're going to cut you off. We just seen that with regards to the government shutdown that just happened. If you don't realize that since the time of slavery, the Democratic Party fought to keep slaves, and it was to control the people so they can use them as a workforce. So if you were so concerned about the civil rights movement, if you did so much of a good thing for the civil rights movement, then why would you months afterwards sign the Immigration Act of 1965 where it was supposed to change the demographic of America's cities? The first the anytime you have someone from a third world country or whatever country that is on a lower economic plane than America, the first thing they gonna do, they gonna go into them low income neighborhoods. And how are them people who are supposed to compete with those that population that is steadily and consistently coming over when they wasn't even coming over here in the right way in the first place?
college grads who now hold so much sway in the Democratic Party.
Hold on, you know what the real problem is? You want to know what the real problem is? Because it's been 40 years since this act took place. Well, I could say well over 40 years. You know what the real problem is? The real problem is that the immigrant population has come over here so much that not only are they taking up these jobs within the lower spectrum of the community, the urban communities, but they are starting to take the jobs from individuals who wouldn't expect a job to be taken away from someone with an H-1B visa or an undocumented person or an immigrant at the same stand, because there is a difference between an immigrant and an illegal immigrant. They wasn't expecting that these people to come to a level to where they would have to compete with them in their workforce. But what would you expect? You gave them opportunity at the lower spectrum of society with the low skill jobs to where they began, when they had children, they got their children began to get them high end jobs. And now here you are, you're dealing with that.
Joan, the Democratic Party to some degree still seems to be, I don't know, in my view, kind of, controlled by these longtime institutionalists. So I guess it's, an age-old question. Does the establishment need to be shaken up? Does a bowling ball need to be rolled into them by these folks and challenged and shaken to get to the place you want to be, which is with some of these new, younger voices?
You're talking to an aging hippie, an aged hippie, I should say. So does the establishment need to be shaken up? Always. That is always true. But I also think the establishment and the whole Democratic Party has to come to terms with the really historic lack of popularity right now of the Democratic Party. There was just another article in the New York Times about how unpopular the Democratic Party has become. And again, I think people are making this too complicated. I think that you certainly, this populist economic message that focuses, we're not going to abandon the poor. We are Democrats. That's not what we do. But a focus on the poor does not, and on redistribution, does not replace a focus on the middle class and what's called pre-distribution. Again, as I keep saying, this is not complicated. Hard work should pay off in a stable life. And you should be able to afford health insurance. You should be able to afford a house, a nice, simple house. And not only are people in the middle, the fragile and failing middle class, they feel they can't get that, but younger generations of college students can't get that. And then on cultural issues, I actually am just about to begin writing a report that will show how Democrats and liberals and progressives can forge cross-class coalitions on cultural issues, rather than messaging those cultural issues in a way that just serve to empower.
Look, let me put this kind of clear because right, she's like kind of speaking code language. Now, what she's talking about culturally is bridging the gap with the people that have already been over here, and the Democratic Party has not done so. Right? You can't redistribute. You when she's talking about redistribution, I mean, you cannot redistribute, right, your workforce at the lower end of of the spectrum, still help them out, right, and then outsource all the jobs that these middle class people who were, excuse me, looking forward to being part of. There is no need for redistribution. That's what the civil rights. I mean, excuse me. That's not what the civil rights movement wanted. They didn't want redistribution. They wanted the opportunity to work. And the only reason why the Civil Rights Act was signed was, I don't think it was primarily for out of respect for President Kennedy. I don't think Lyndon B. Johnson actually wanted to sign that because the Immigration Act in 1965 came up too soon after Civil Rights Acts were passed. And if you take the opportunity to read it or listen to the speech with regards to the Immigration Act in 1965, he will say he was trying to change the uh, demographics of the American system. You had a bunch of Chinese and Hispanic population from all from South America and everything, but these are the main two benefactors of that act. When if you would have just bridged the gap between the white population and the black population, if you would have bridged that gap, you wouldn't have the problem that you're having today. Decoded.
Their opponents. And I'll just give you an example, which is climate change. If you work outside for a living, it's 117 degrees out there. You can't work in your auto body shop. You can't work as a gardener. You can't work as a farmer. Farmers can't grow what their grandfathers grew. That's a way to message climate change that's going to connect with some of the central concerns of blue collar people. And on immigration, for example, you know, immigrants are working class people, just like these working class voters who Democrats have lost. They are hardworking, They have family values. These are people who share your values. That's incredibly important. Also, a really important is middle status people in all hierarchies. They're more traditional, they're more conventional, and they really value order. These are order takers in their jobs. And they figure if I have to follow the rules, other people should have to follow the rules. And so the fact that it was not Democrats, it was Republicans who opposed the legislation that was going to create order at the border, that is something that you should be hearing from Democrats over and over again. It is possible to build these cross-class bridges on these cultural issues. You just need the formula, and the formula is crystal clear.
Let me ask you another thing as part of.
Hold on, we probably need to listen to that again.
And so the fact that it was not Democrats, it was Republicans who share your values. That's incredibly important. Also, a really important is middle status people in all hierarchies. They're more traditional, they're more conventional, and they really value order. These are order takers in their jobs. And they figure if I have to follow the rules, other people should have to follow the rules. And so the fact that it was not Democrats, it was Republicans who opposed the legislation that was going to create order at the border, that is something that you should be hearing from Democrats over and over again. It is possible to build these cross-class bridges on these cultural issues. You just need the formula, and the formula is crystal clear.
Let me ask you.
Listen, the formula is crystal clear, and the Republican Party is doing it right now under Donald Trump. No more low-skilled labor workers into this country. The people that should be coming across that border should be high-end skilled labor. The Democrats wasn't about to fix nothing. The Democrats were wanting people to come in. That's why Joe Biden brought all these people and allowed all these people to come up over here. If the Democrats had to answer why they didn't do it when President Biden was in office. If the Democrats had to answer why didn't they do it, why President Biden was in office. You know, don't try to be politically correct to save whatever career that you have, or to seem so much about your party. The fact of the matter, you got a book called Outclassed. You got outclassed. You get outclassed with the redistribution of the workforce in this country. You get outclassed. Like I said, it wasn't a problem. So for instance, how many more professors you got in the field right now that is taking up your opportunity to seek employment that generally that you would call come from either first generation or second generation immigrants. I'm talking about the lady that's you seeing in this video. And you talking about bridging the gap. Okay, well then in that sense, and what she's saying that everybody should be over here taking her job. If she wasn't allowed to work as a professor, it'd be a problem. How do you bridge the gap? You do what the Trump administration, since we already have the laws in place, you do what the Trump administration is exactly doing. No more low skill jobs is allowed over here into this country. If you want to come to this country, you got to bring something of value. You cannot take out the lower spectrum of our workforce, giving them the opportunity to rise into the middle class while they're steady watching you do so. That is what the problem is.
Another thing that's part of the new landscape of reaching out and listening politically, the Democratic Party paid about $20 million reportedly. A friend of mine helps run the thing about, the what's it called, the project, or to speak with American males in this. And So in that $20 million, I'm sitting here saying, hey, here's a $30 book that pretty much says much the same
Thank
thing.
you.
And just wondering, why don't we just get more books and send these out? But what is going on in the question of gender and this concern that males, in terms of our social equation, are defecting and leaving the Democratic Party in droves and joining up with President Trump, with the Republicans, wherever they may be? There seems to be something subterranean going on there.
It's not subterranean, Steve. It's right at the surface. If you look at what Americans believe, and this will shock some people, but most Americans, and certainly most men, believe they should be providers. Now, we've created an economy where, again, it's really hard to get a stable middle-class job.
I think she just said clear point right there. It's harder for you to get a middle class job. It's harder for you to get a lower class job, and we understand the reasons why. The Immigration Act of 1965 was a pillar to retaliate against the civil rights movement, the win of the civil rights movement. It was to say that, you know, yeah, you got this win. You won this in terms of equal rights. So such and such equal rights when we wanted you to integrate, but you as a group of people, we're going to uh, you're going to get reassigned in this country. We're gonna make sure that you stay at the bottom, at the bottom. You're gonna have to work so much more harder at being an economic force in this country. And the response to this that we have for you is this Immigration Act of 1965. Yeah, of course they feel like they have a problem with getting into the workforce. You're not allowing them to get them to the workforce. If you would allow, if you would just have, like she said, if you would have bridged the gap, worked on bridging the gap instead of creating a bigger divide between the blacks and the whites after the Civil Rights Act, you will be much more of a greater party instead of working hard for years to systematically take jobs away from the young. This is from the youth, making it that much harder for them to actually have access to employment, and also making not only for the youth. Say for instance, you remember back in the day, there was a thing called a summer job where working at a park or McDonald's or something, you will get that so to help you provide for your, school clothes after summer. I remember there was a time to where summer jobs was the thing for a child to get, especially if you didn't have parents who can afford to get you some type of, clothing and stuff like that. At least you can help out, and where you ain't had to worry about your parents getting you no type of clothes for school, where you can go and be fresh to death at the beginning of the semester. Especially if you didn't have to go to summer school. Working at a McDonald's is easy. You don't see no in California particularly. You see all grown folks working at these stores, these like things like these fast food chains, like particularly Dunkin' Donuts, McDonald's, and these are individuals. How did that job become a career for individuals? That job became a career because what you have is you have adults being in that job that kids are supposed to be in. Only job I still see where they're hiring a lot of youth is in and out. In and out hires a lot of youth. When you go by UCLA, over here by the in and out by UCLA, you see it seems like nothing but college students. You don't see too many individuals in their 30s and 40s and almost 50 years old still trying to work in these type of restaurants. These are supposed to be starter jobs for our citizens to grow and develop not technical skills. So in technical skills are transferable skills for the workforce. So she's talking uh, crap. Anyway, man, I'm gonna let you check out this video. If you want to, go ahead and check out the video. The title of the book is Outclassed, and she is particularly right that the white folks are getting outclassed, and not to be racial with regards to what I'm saying, but it is to be more frank than what she's being.